Hi, and welcome back to another edition of Indusoft Web Studio video training series for version 7.1. Today we're going to cover a tank demo that utilizes a lot of the features that we've covered in previous trainings and kind of summarize things into almost a real-world demo utilizing VB-Script as a simulation in the background. So what this this particular video is going to cover is adding some tags that are going to support the tank and the levels and the pressures, including a class, because what we're going to do is we're going to represent three different tanks by one graphic on the screen. Let me show you what we're going to do. I'm going to go ahead and slide here. We're going to represent with a single graphic showing a tank and a fill valve and an empty valve. We're going to have a drop down that'll select one of those three tanks, and we'll display a virtual image of what that tank, of one of those three tanks, will be doing, including its temperature and the pressure. Again, we'll have a fill valve and an empty valve. We'll show some piping here that are made up of just rectangles. We'll have some bar graphs, a combo box, and a text data link that'll show which which tank we're connected to. But all this is going to be built around class tag, so that it will make it a little bit easier to do and manage. So let's go back up here. We're going to add the tanks, the valves, and the selection. We'll add simulation, and then we'll add the contents of the tanks, be able to make that flexible and changeable. So let's go ahead and get started. What I've done is, as I've done in previous videos, open up my template screen that I made the right color, the right size, and saved that as tank demo with no space. Once I had that saved, then I copied my last navigation button down here on my navigation screen, changed the text to tank demo, and changed the screen that it pointed to tank demo. So now that I have this, let me get some more screen space here. I'm going to go ahead and hide those. And what we'll do is, before we get started drawing all of these, I'm going to put in some tags that will support this. So let's go over here to the Global tab, Project Tags, Datasheet View, and down here at the bottom, what we're going to do is we're going to add in tank num as a tag. That will be the number of the tank that we're currently on, and that's just going to be an integer. So that we can see the three different tanks. We're going to use that to select the three different tanks that we're on. Then we're going to need the fill valve, and so we're going to put valve fill, and then we're going to have two different tags related to the fill valve. We're going to have a state, and that will be the tag that will control the color of the valve. And now that's going to be an array of 3, and even though that we're only going to have 3 tanks, we're going to call this 1, 2, and 3. So we're going to leave 0 alone, but we're going to use that up, and this will be a Boolean. And then we also need valve fill command. That'll also be an array of 3, actually 4, and Boolean type. And then we'll need a valve empty state, also 3, and a Boolean. And then valve empty command, also 3, and Boolean. And next we're going to have to create our class that will contain the temperature, the level, the pressure, and the contents of our tanks. And what we're going to do here is we're going to go right click on classes, insert a class, and we're going to name this class C tank. Now the lowercase c in front of it does not dictate that it's a class. I'm just using that convention so that I can recognize that later on. There are several different conventions that you can use. We can name this tank, and then we can put the individual members. We can put a letter that might represent integer, Boolean, real, or string in front of it, or we can do it this way. Either way, it doesn't matter. Just choose a convention and stick with it. And we'll say OK. And here we're going to create temperature, and that will be a real. We're going to create pressure, and that'll also be a real. We'll create level, That too will be a reel. And I'm just tabbing over, and I know you can't see this, but I tab over to the type, and I hit the letter R on my keyboard. And that instead of pulling the drop down down, that just takes me right to reel. So that just saves a little bit of typing there. And here we're going to put contents, and that will list, that'll contain the text that will list what contents are in the given tank. And so that's going to be a string, since it's going to contain the contents of that. Now we could and probably should put a description in here, but for the sake of speed here, I'm not going to. But in a real-world application, you would want to do that. So I'm going to go ahead and close this class, and now I'm going to add a new tag. Now, something to point out: what I just added were class members inside of this class. Will eventually be a class tag. This class contains members, and these are not really tags. These are members of the class, so that they do not conflict with the tags that we had created previously. They are members of a class. So when I add tank as a tag, and this will also be an array of 3, I am going to put this as this new class type here called ctank. So that will contain the contents, the level, the pressure, and the temperature for each of those 3 tanks. And once I do this, then that will take those 4 times those 4 different members and up our tag count by that amount. Once we do that, let's see. Let me double check my list here off screen. And yep, that's all I need at this point. So once we've done that, we can go ahead and click out of this. Now what I'm going to do is draw the graphics that I showed on that PowerPoint slide briefly. I'm going to go here under Graphics, and just make sure I'm here on my tank demo screen. Go to Symbols, and under the System Symbols, I'm going to go grab a tank, and I'm just going to grab this first tank, Tank 1, and put it here on the screen. I'm going to leave myself some room at the top for my valves and my piping. The next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a rectangle to simulate the piping that is in here. Eventually there'll be a valve up here. Now in order to do this, I'm going to change this a little bit. I'm going to change this rectangle to have no border around it, and then I'm going to change the fill color to be fill effect, and I'm going to start at black and go to white. Now I like this 3-dimensional look, this shading that goes from black to white. This looks kind of like a pipe, but in this case it's in the wrong orientation. So I'm going to change this to a vertical orientation, choose this variant down here. I don't know, hopefully you can see that little dotted line. I've chosen that variant there. Click on OK, and now that pretty much looks like a pipe. Now the next thing that I want to do, to be efficient, I could copy this down here, but that's an extra object that I don't need. What I'm going to do is extend this through and then push it to the back, and now I've just made one object that looks like it's really 2, even though I don't really need 2 separate objects, because I'm not, in this case, I'm not going to show flow through that pipe. Now this is a little bit offset. A couple of different ways I can change that. I can go in here to the format, and I can move it with my X and Y. Another opportunity that I have is to select both of those objects by holding down the Shift key and using the Align here under the Format tab, and center those. Okay, so now that I have that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold down my Control key and copy that, because I'm going to use that in just a little bit. I'm going to then go into my symbols, and I'm going to grab a valve out of the symbol library. I'm going to grab valve number 6 and place that here on the screen. Now that valve does not exactly line up with those pipes, and in a more production, a real world application, I might spend a little bit more time on this. But what I do want to show you is the fact that I can resize this. Now a symbol, when it first comes in, it cannot be resized, but if I double click on it and uncheck the Use Linked Size, I can then resize this symbol as I need to. Now this works better with some symbols than it does with others. pay really close attention to symbols that have position animations on those. Those don't tend to scale very well, and the positions will be off. You will have to do some adjustments if you're going to scale those. Now this is still off a little bit from there. I'm going to offset it just a little bit more just to give you a better idea. And then what I can do is click on the rectangle in that pipe, and then use my format and align to the left. And that'll kind of align those all up. Now the next thing that I'm going to do here is I'm going to copy this down by holding my control key. Bring this down here. Once again, select the pipe there and format align to the left. That'll center that one up. So now we have our fill valve and our empty valve. Now what I'm going to do is reduce this pipe up here a little bit and bring this over in here. Copy that down and bring that in there. We got these two. I'm going to hold down the shift key and select that middle pipe there. Again, go back to the format, align to the left. Now everything is pretty much in a straight line and easy to get to. Okay, so now we need to tie all of these things to the different tags that we have. Probably the most important one is the tank. Now the tank is going to represent 3 different tanks, and we're going to eventually put a drop-down selector on here. But how do we tie this to the right tag? Let's double-click on this, and the way that we're going to simulate this is the values are going to go from 0 to 100. So in this case, I don't have to change that. But the tag level is going to come from the tank class. So you can see here that once we've selected that, it starts to build this. And then I can select the index. Which of the 3 tanks do I want to point to? 0, 1, 2, or 3. Well, I want this to be selectable, and I've actually created a tag for that. So here we're going to choose tag, and down here the tank num, or tank number, is going to point to the number 0, 1, 2, or 3. In this case, really just 1, 2, or 3 that I want to view that level. In this case, I'm going to click on OK. And now I want to select the member. Now this dives into that class that we created, the temperature, the pressure, the level, and the contents. And for this tank, I want to show the level on that bar graph on the side of it. So I'm going to choose that. Now we can see this format. It's got the tank, that which is a class. It's the tank num, chooses the array or the tank number. And then the level is the member that is chosen from within that class. So we built that all up just by clicking. Didn't have to type anything. Click on OK. And now that tank will follow that. Now, in a similar fashion, I'm going to put 2 bar graphs next to this. So I'm going to just grab a rectangle, and here I'm going to grab draw the rectangle, apply a bar graph animation to it, and then here I'm going to build the expression up just as I just did with tank. The index will be tank num, and the member will be temperature. And I have a couple of choices. I can do that whole process again, or I can just hold down my control key, drag this over here, and change just this piece to pressure. Now I don't necessarily recommend typing. I'd rather you choose from the list, but this is another way we can do it. Okay, now I want to label those, so I'm going to put 2 pieces of text here. We'll do temperature, and copy that over, change that to pressure. Make sure I didn't put an extra space in there. And now what I'm going to do is just align those up a little bit. Probably the easiest thing to do is select the text, select the bar graph, and then do the align center. Same with the temperature. Align center. Okay, so we have those. The next thing that I'm going to do is how to choose which tank that we're using here. So we're going to put a combo box, which is here, right up here above this. And how we're going to build this is the position is going to drive the tank num. So that tag, again, now I can double click on this. Let me click off of here, double click on here, go to integer, and choose tank num. That way I don't have to accidentally misspell it or mistype it. So when I have this drop down, it's going to show me a list. So I haven't built that list yet, but the value that we choose from that list will go into tank num. That'll drive which tank we're viewing. And here under data sources, we're going to choose static labels. Now I could choose from an array, a text file, or even a database, but for now we're just going to use static labels, which are going to be kind of contained in this object itself. So here under settings, I'm going to set up those labels. We're going to say select tank. And now what I'm doing is I'm working off the fact that we're not using element or index 0 in this array. So that would be the first choice. And that tank 1 is going to be number 1, tank 2 is going to be number 2, and tank 3 is going to give us a number 3 back into tank num. So we're going to kind of utilize the fact that we're skipping over 0 and using that to display that drop-down label there. Everything else there is okay. And let's see, the other thing that I need to do here is let's display right on the tank which tank we're viewing for the moment. So I'll just put some text on here. We'll call it tank, and then put a pound sign, and tie that to a text data link animation. And here under tag expression, we'll also not type that. We'll choose the tank number there, and that'll display 0, 1, 2, or 3 depending on which we've got dropped down there. And let's see, one other thing. Oh, eventually we're going to want to display the contents of the tanks and give us a way to enter those. So here I'm going to put contents, and I'm going to give us a few pound signs depending on what type of product we're going to have in there. When I apply the text data link to this, I'm going to put in here that this will be the tank class, index again of tank num, and the member will be the contents. And one other thing that I want to do is input enable. This will give us a way to change what's in that tank as we go along here. Might center this up, and to make this look even a little bit nicer, what I might do is just put a little bounding rectangle around here. I'll push this to the back, and now that I have those bar graphs on there, no, I didn't send it all the way to the back. Let's send it all the way to the back, and maybe change its color to be a little bit different color here, maybe a light gray. This way to bound that up a little bit and tie those together. Okay, one last thing that I need to do, I almost forgot, is to change our valves. So let me double click on this, and the command for this first valve will be the valve fill command, but it's going to be an index of tank num. And in a similar fashion, we're going to do valve fill state, which will change its color. And I forgot to, let's see, valve fill state, forgot to choose its index, which will also be tank num. And last but not least, down here, the command for the empty will be here, index of tank num. And the very last thing we need to do is the empty state with tank num. Say OK. So now we have a way to choose the tank. We have the level, the temperature, the pressure, the contents that we can enter. We have the fill and empty valves. Now all we need to do is create a simulation for this. Now off screen I have previously typed in and debugged, troubleshot the script that's going to run this. So what I'm going to do here is add this under the Tasks tab. So I'm going here under the Tasks tab, and under Script, I'm going to right click on Script and insert a new script. Now this is going to be our tank demo simulation. And now that's just for documentation purposes only. That doesn't affect how it works. And I want this to execute over and over again. I could put a tag in here and enable or disable this. But for now I'm just going to put a 1 in there to enable it. Now off screen I have copied and pasted a script that I had put in here before that actually contains these comments in here. And so when I paste that back in, you'll see those comments. Now a couple of things to point out. Now I'm going to give you a second to go ahead and pause this video and then I'll come back and explain what this is. But when you pause this video, if you want to go ahead and type this in, and it's a good exercise to go ahead and manually type this in and try to troubleshoot and figure things out. And after we come back from the pause, then I'll explain what it's doing. Then I'll explain also what some common mistakes and some troubleshooting techniques. So go ahead and pause the video right now, and then when we come back, I'll explain it. Okay, assuming that you've paused and come back, the very first thing up here, and don't forget this is very easy to miss. I've typed in dim I. That declares the variable I that is in this VB script, and hopefully you've watched the VB script video, the previous video, and that talked about VB script variables versus Indusoft tag names. That's why we did not have to declare tag called I, because this is a VB script variable. Now what this code is going to do is it's going to go through a loop, this for next loop, 3 different times, and each time through it's going to increment the index I from 1, and it's going to eventually count up to 3, and that's going to take care of our 3 different tanks. Now the way that this works, the first time through this will be 1, the second time through it'll be 2, the third time through it'll be 3, and then when it gets done, it will finish, go back and check our execution to see if it's still true. If it is, then it goes back and it does it all over again. Whenever we change the valve empty command, depending on what tank we're on, notice that this is a Indusoft tag because it's preceded by a $sign. Whenever we change that command, whenever we click on that empty valve, it writes it to the state, which changes the color of that valve. Same thing with the fill valve, depending on which number index we're on, it writes it back to the state, which changes its color. Here what we're doing is we're taking the temperature and the pressure of each of those tanks, depending on which index we're on, and it does some interesting little math to simulate some sine and cosine waves, and the math in here gives us some amplitude to that. Basically this goes, I believe it goes from 0 to 100. I'd have to double check my math on that, but this shows in those bar graphs some waves, some values going up and down in sine waves or cosine waves. The next part is the tank. What it does is it first checks to see if the level is greater than 0, and if the valves are in the proper state, then it allows us to subtract or continue to go down and empty. So this is the kind of empty section right here. As long as we're still greater than 0, it will continue to empty. Once it hits 0, it stops emptying and then won't go any lower than 0. And in a similar fashion, this else if statement here, as long as we're not over 100, as long as we're less than 100 and the valves are in the correct state, it will continue to add 1 to the level until it gets to 100, and then it will stop. I think the very first time I did this script, for some reason I had something wrong in here, and it didn't check the level, and it just went past 100 and kept on going. And then when I emptied it, it didn't look like it was emptying, but what was really happening is it was up over like 150 or 160, and it took some time for it to actually drain out. So I used Database Spy to watch my tank level, and that helped me troubleshoot that. So some other troubleshooting techniques. Spaces are relatively important in here, and so notice also that these are asterisks or multiplication. This is plus. Notice in a few places that there's, for example, this pi, there's an open parenthesis, a closed parenthesis, and then another parenthesis that matches another one on this side. So the parentheses and the correct numbers are important. Around the letter I's are going to be square brackets. Those are not parentheses. And so hopefully you can read that. I'll zoom in on this during the post-production of the video, so it'll give you a chance to see this a little bit more cleanly. And at that point, we can go ahead and save this. I'll save that script, save it as sheet number 1, and we can save our screen. We should be able to go ahead and run this. And tank demo. Now that we're on tank 0, we should be able to select tank 1. We should have a temperature and a pressure that are seemingly going up in random, but it's following that sine and that cosine wave. So these should be, if I remember my trig properly, about 90 degrees out of phase. And now we have tank 1 level. There's no level currently. Let's open up the fill valve. You can see the level climbing. This valve is currently closed. Let's stop that there. So we've got roughly 50 or 60% there. Let's change to tank number 2. Now we're viewing tank number 2, and we can fill that a little bit. Let's fill that to about 25%. We should be able to go back to tank number 1. That's still at its 60%. Let's go now view tank number 3. And we should be able to fill that up. It's filling. We've opened that valve. Let's close off that valve, and that's somewhere up around 75% there. Go back to tank 2, back to tank 1. We can go ahead and empty tank 1 a little bit with this valve. Close that off, and we haven't added any contents yet. Let's go ahead and change the contents. Let's see, tank number 1 will be beer, and then we'll go to tank number 2. We'll change this to wine, and tank number 3, good old-fashioned water. So now we have tank number 1 has beer, tank number 2 has wine, and tank number 3 has water. Now each of one of those could come from a recipe, they could come from PLC, and we've used a simulation script to simulate this, and that may be controlling these values now. Maybe you don't have the PLC connected. One of the things that you can do is utilizing those same tags, now disable that script for the simulation. Those tags maybe then could be tied to real-world PLC values, and then you've done some troubleshooting and proven that your tanks work just fine. Now let me show you another concept of something else that we do in the training class. If you're to visit our Austin, Texas facility, is on the tanks. Another option that you have, instead of drawing one set of tank and valve combination that does everything, we do something else, which is to select the tank. Let's say I'm going to hold down my shift key, the bar graphs, the text, and the contents here, and then what we might do is group this, and I'm going to go ahead and move all of this over just a touch here. And I purposely didn't choose the selector because what we're going to do is copy this group, and what we might do is make 3 individual tanks, and instead of having a selector, put 3 tanks that represent the 3 real world tanks on the screen, and not have to select between them to make them all visible all the time. But the reason I did this as a group is I copied this, and a technique that we show in the real class is to go into the properties of the group and use this replace, and here we can get at the text that's in here, the various properties for that. We can then go down to the tags and properties and replace all of those. So maybe there would be a tank number 1. Instead of putting tank number in here, you may have hard-coded a 1, a 2, a 3 for each of those, and this will allow you to replace inside of that group as you wanted to copy and paste, and maybe make those draw the drawing one time, and then go back and replace all the stuff that's in there, and make that a little bit easier to do. So hopefully you found this interesting and informative, and starts to tie some of the objects and techniques that we've done together for you, and starts to help you understand things. If you have any feedback, please feel free to contact us. If you have an order, also feel free to contact us. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks, and have a great day.